Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello, and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, the podcast that focuses on the ways that organizations just like yours are using data to make their business more intelligent. I'm your host, Matthew Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. This week on the show, we're speaking with Lindsey Zuloaga, Director of Data Science at HireVue. HireVue offers a platform that promises better hiring with AI-driven predictions. We want to know more about how all that works, so we invited Lindsey to the show. Let's dive in. So, Lindsey, welcome to the Intelligent Business Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could join us. And I really want to hear about how AI can help people make better, bias-free hiring decisions. But before we do that, I did want to start out talking a little bit about your role there as Director of Data Science at HireVue. And I was curious, since you have a background in physics, how you got into the field of data science.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Now there's some schools have data science programs, but before, the last 5 years or so, really a lot of data scientists just came from different STEM fields. So I studied physics in undergrad and went to graduate school, got a master's and a Ph.D., did experimental physics, ended up doing a postdoc in Germany as well. When I first started grad school, I really thought I wanted to work with my hands. I don't want to just sit at a computer all day. So that's why I did experiments, and I was aligning lasers and making nanoparticles and doing all this experimental work. And much to my surprise, the part that I enjoyed the most was writing MATLAB code to analyze my data. So I kind of discovered that I liked that a lot. So when I did decide to transition to industry, I kind of saw going that direction as a good fit. My story with that transition is kind of interesting because I think it kind of leads into why I care about working in the hiring space.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing well in academia, and I thought, I'm just going to get a job. I have all these publications, and I shouldn't have a problem getting a job. It turns out people in what I call the real world in industry don't care about publications very much.
True.
So I was really transitioning to a whole new world without any connections. And I did underestimate the value of having connections. But I went into it just thinking, I'll apply for jobs online and see what comes up. So many people have probably experienced this when you apply for jobs online. A lot of times you use these applicant tracking systems or ATSs. Really, it's pretty impersonal. You feel like you go and upload a resume, and then you have to manually input your resume again. You spend a lot of time kind of personalizing your resume and your cover letter because people tell you that's important. And it's important to really, don't make it sound like you wrote the same one for every job. It needs to be kind of special to the job, and use the same keywords that are in the job posting and things like that. So you spend a lot of time preparing, and then you submit your application, and much of the time just never hear anything ever again. So I went through that, and kind of, it was like a tough time of just kind of applying for jobs, and then it feels like your application goes into a black hole, and you don't know if a person ever saw it. Sometimes you get a rejection email. Sometimes you get nothing. So, that's kind of where I first learned of this broken process in hiring, and how companies that have large volumes of applicants are just, not able to look at all their applicants, and they simply have to ignore a huge number of people. So with that, I can segue kind of into what I do at HireVue, if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, sure. I think especially because I immediately wanted to talk a little bit about candidate experience, because I know that's one of the things that HireVue sort of promotes as one of the benefits of using your platform. But then I realized, well, we probably have to talk about what HireVue does before we talk about candidate experience.
Sure.
And so yes, I think now would be an apt time to transition to talk a little bit more about what HireVue actually sort of brings to the table. And you have a quite illustrious set of clients.
Yeah, so kind of our product that we started off with is just called Ondemand interviewing. So companies, used to spend a lot of money flying people in or just having to organize phone interviews and things like that. This product is made for consistency and efficiency and kind of convenience. So companies build an interview. They can ask whatever questions they want in video or text form. They can kind of have it branded so their candidates are also consumers. So they want the experience to be good. And they send that interview out. They invite people to take it. The candidates can record themselves answering questions just whenever it's convenient for them. Actually, well over half of our interviews are taken like outside of normal business hours.
Right.
People usually, have other jobs or they have busy lives. They can record themselves answering the questions and then submit them and to be reviewed by the company. So it's kind of a substitution for the kind of resume phone screening stages of the process to make that more efficient. And also we we don't think a resume is a very good representation of a person a lot of times. And I mentioned these applicant tracking systems. A lot of times people game that system, like with their resume or their cover letter, they'll hide a bunch of keywords in white text, things like that. So they can get past these filters. Like the filters might be looking for certain things like the word Harvard or 4.0 or whatever is on your resume. So people do kind of have ways of gaming that system. And with our video interviews, we hope that the person can kind of express themselves, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. And we also have added things like coding challenges for more technical roles.
Yep.
And more recently added some games, some cognitive games as well.
Yeah.
So the particular product that I work on was initially really popular with more high volume clients because they still have a lot of applicants. So now they have these videos, but they might not be able to watch all the videos. So it's kind of the same problem as before. So what we do is we train algorithms to look at the videos of job applicants that work for that company and who've done well at the job versus people who did not do well. And by doing well, that could mean a number of things. Like it could be just retention, it could be sales numbers, some kind of performance metric that we train the algorithm to try to predict. So basically what we're doing is we're looking for patterns in the behavior of people who are good at that type of job. And then we sort the candidates as they come in. So you get a higher concentration of like more promising people towards the top of the list. And those are the people that can be reviewed by humans first.
Right. So actually I have a question about that. So when I've had other people on the show talking about AI or machine learning and stuff like that. And I always like to pretend I totally know what people are talking about when they say these things. But then when you say something like we train an algorithm, and so could you talk a little bit about that? Because what I'm assuming is on some level, you've got to train them by having them watch videos from people who are already successful employees, for example, at the company?
Exactly.
How does that work?
Yeah. So we have to have some training data. So we have the outcomes of people who've taken interviews and, what ended up happening with them in the job. So that is our training data. And then that's what the algorithm is trained on. And then it's applied to new people who come in. So specifically what we're doing is we're taking that video interview and we're breaking it down into more structured data, like the transcript, so the words that someone said and topics they discussed, things like that. Audio features like tone of voice and pauses and facial features, so facial expressions, I should say, like smiling, looking content. I mean, things like that. And I think a big misunderstanding a lot of times is people being like, so what if I don't smile very much? We're never saying what's important to the job. It totally depends on the job. So to be a successful flight attendant, smiling might be important, but to be a successful web developer, maybe it's not that important. So
no, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. Would it kill you to smile?
Yeah, right, exactly.
No.
Well, so that's interesting. So I just started realizing, so what you're using, because I was thinking you had to actually videotape people in the roles, but you actually have this training material just through the video interviews you've collected, and you can actually then say what happened with this or that candidate, right?
Sometimes we do have to get new interviews from existing employees. Okay. It depends if our customer's been using video interviewing for a while, or if they're totally new to it. Which that's a little more challenging. That's something that's pretty well known in the job assessment space. So, we look at this as a type of job assessment, and job assessments have been around for decades. Oh, yeah. But kind of, do you have the data you need, or do you need to do some kind of concurrent study where you bring in current employees and have them take the interview and then look at their performance? It is there's some trickiness with that, because you have to incentivize them to take it, and you hope they care about it and take it like they want a job, and not just like, I'm just doing this because they asked me to do it. Yeah. So we look at how to get the best data we can in those situations.
But I think it highlights the importance of this training data set, because you can't, right? Of course, that was, as you were describing it, I thought, of course, you can't videotaping existing employees as if you're interviewing them, as you're asking them to play act, and hopefully and then you're trying to train an algorithm to see people who aren't play acting or evaluate their performance. So I already see how it's better if you could actually just have an archive of existing video interviews with known outcomes. Yeah, that's definitely
preferable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I was interested. So we did start talking about the candidate experience here, and I know what you described, the kind of black box of applying. I know back in the old days, that was kind of black hat. Well, not exactly black hat SEO, but gray hat anyway, to do invisible fonts and stuff like that to try to gain Google. I had no idea people were doing that with ATS systems as well. But and so I know there's a lot of bad things with the candidate experience in general, the way it's set up online. But I guess HireVue says it's a better candidate experience to be able to do this interview stuff using video and things like that. But how do you defend that claim, Lindsey?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they take a video interview, the first time, they feel a little awkward.
Right.
And so even though we have, overall quite a bit of satisfaction with the product, I know when I took it for the first time, it's kind of like, this is weird because no one's responding to me. I'm just recording myself. And some people in this age of YouTube and Snapchat and everything, some people are more comfortable with that than others. But, and I think probably people will become more and more comfortable over time. But I think one of the biggest kind of misunderstandings is that this interview replaces your interview with a human.
Right.
So people saying like, I would rather interview with a person. Mm-hmm. And like I said before, that's not really the stage of the process that we are working at. We're working at kind of near the top of the funnel and those initial stages. So it's more just replacing your resume and phone screening than an actual interview with a human being, which, further down the funnel, that becomes important. Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of discussion of, all of fairness in general, and we can get into that more. But I think what you kind of have to keep in mind is like that this is a kind of, the numbers and the volumes can be so high that we're looking at a situation that's currently broken and trying to improve upon it.
Yeah.
It doesn't always necessarily mean that companies are going to find the best person for the job every single time. But we hope to help with that.
Right. No. And I think it makes sense, since arguably the most unpleasant part of the application process, if we're coming at this from the candidate standpoint, is there at the very beginning. Actually getting the interview, and even if you don't get the job, that whole thing can actually be sort of exciting, or it even makes sense if you didn't get it. But it's more like you were talking about, you don't get a response, you don't know what's happened, you're not sure if you actually presented yourself properly, and having an opportunity to do that in a way that is becoming much more culturally common, like through Snapchats and stuff like you were just saying. I definitely see how that creates a better experience up top, and also then creates a better way of screening out, because that's where you have the high volume. And from a hiring manager standpoint, that's the biggest problem, is sifting through 50, 100, 300 resumes or something like that.
Right. And now that I'm on the other side of it and I've done that, I know how hard it is to really differentiate people by their resume.
Oh, yeah.
I get resumes and they all look really similar.
Yes. And so
that's when like a video interview or also like a coding challenge for me when I've hired data scientists has been huge, because it's kind of, you give something that's simple enough that it's kind of just like pass or fail. Like if you can't do this, then you're not moving on to the next stage. And that's really helpful.
Right. And it becomes very clear to them then too why it didn't happen. Wow, man, if that's what the work's going to be like, I couldn't do it anyway. But so I was curious, because that is one of the things that HireVue now has incorporated, is this gamification, and trying to look for sort of cognitive abilities through games, not just coding challenges, but it sounded like also just almost puzzles or something. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we acquired a company from the UK last year called MindX, who does these cognitive games, and they're building more and more, actually, not just kind of cognitive, but social as well. So like reading facial expressions, or how would you respond to the situation? You kind of have some options of how you handle something. And those are examples that we use in video interviews as well, when situational questions are really telling. And then also, for certain jobs, things like recognizing patterns could be important, short-term memory, things like that. So there's a lot of different games, and it's the same thing as a video interview. It's not simply just always like the better you do on the game, the more likely you are to get the job. It really depends on what that job is and kind of what's important for that job. Right.
And so getting back around to this concept of bias, because obviously there's huge conversation around bias. I was even thinking like what I thought you were going to say when I talked about trying to train people up on videos from existing employees. Depending if your hiring practices themselves have been biased, then there may be biases that get built into your training set. Just the fact of the matter that they're all the same quote unquote type of person. So it's curious to me, because when I think of video stuff, I think of it as more prone to bias when humans are looking at it, for sure. In fact, the only it is purely anecdotal, though. I'm sure there's plenty of research that would back me up on this. But oddly enough, when I went to university, the university I went to had a reputation for being, I guess, it was out in California and sort of crazy 60s type place. And it's not considered that nowadays. And when I went there, they had gotten a new dean of admissions, and they had instituted a new policy asking people to send a photograph along with their application. And it was funny from the people, other students, the kind of word on the street, and it could have just been pure rumor. I never had anyone from the dean of admissions office say this, that they had done that in order to kind of clean up the student body, in a sense.
Oh, wow.
And I would say, if I knew people, because I started school in 81, the people I knew that were from the 70s were very different from the people who were there by the end of the 80s. And they had done that. So anyway, so that's what I carry around in my mind, as there's a social control element that was proactively biased. They were trying to bias the outcomes, was at least the rumor, with photographs. So so how, if you're using kind of visual, can we talk about how, as it even says in your marketing material, you want to have highly valid, bias-mitigated assessments that helps make
Yeah.
people make better hiring decisions. So after a long prologue, tell us more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're absolutely right that when with any training data, you have to worry that training data itself is biased, or that there's just not representation of certain groups. So maybe there was only one female software engineer and she wasn't good. So the model's going to see, like every time I hear someone talk like this, they're bad. Yeah. And you just make that simplified assumption. So you're absolutely right. This is a huge conversation right now. And I've given talks about kind of what is fairness and machine learning. How do you define that mathematically? It turns out there's a lot of different ways of talking about it. And there's a lot of different definitions of fairness.
Okay.
And they all kind of have trade-offs with one another, but it's difficult and in most real world situations, impossible to satisfy all of them. So you have one, you give up the other. That's a whole other story. But for us, it's a little more clear because, first of all, like an example I like to give is some really tricky situations are things like, say, if I was a bank and I said I'm not going to loan money to anyone who makes under $15,000 a year, like I'm not going to give a home loan to someone with that income. Even by saying that, I've already probably become biased because the distribution of wealth or distribution of income, is different based on age, race, and gender.
Yep. So
these kind of differing base rates can really play a role in making an algorithm unfair in the end with its outcomes. For us, we're in a kind of a nice controlled situation where we're not looking at anything that's tied to age, race, and gender tightly. We want to just look at that job interview, and we do everything we can to blind the algorithm from actually what the person looks like, so things like age, race, gender, and attractiveness. Mm-hmm. So we actually do have algorithms that predict those things, and we use them to make sure the algorithm's being fair. So what we're actually putting into the job performance prediction are things like words and audio and facial expressions. But it's not enough to just assume, and because people have been burned in the past by saying, well, we're never telling the algorithm what race you are, so we're fine. There can be things that are tightly correlated with race that are in there, like certain words that were used, or with gender, like speaking a certain way. So what we do is we audit the algorithms after the fact as well. And if we see in the job assessment space, they call it adverse impact. So we're lucky that there are actually laws around how job assessments work. So there's something called the 4/5 rule, which says, the no group can be at some cutoff score, no group can be scoring less than 4/5 of the top scoring group. So we look at that with our models, and if we see any adverse impacts, so we have a group that's systematically being scored lower, we go back to the training data, to the video, the actual video data, and we try to take that and predict something like gender, for example. So we say this model is sexist. What is even telling the algorithm what gender someone is? Like, we're not telling it that explicitly, but how is it finding a pattern there? Right. And we simply remove any features that are problematic. So we have a lot of data going into our algorithm. So if we find something, for example, like something we've seen is, pauses between your utterances. This is one thing that we've seen, we've removed because it seems that a lot of times women take smaller pauses. I think that was the way that it went. So women talk faster, basically, or they take less pause in between their utterances. So if that's giving the algorithm a hint as to who is female, we will take it out of the algorithm and continue to do that until we kind of reach this point where we still have predictive validity, but we don't have any significant adverse impact. So that's the way we've been dealing with it for years, kind of, and we've just become more and more vocal this last year or so, because we know that a lot of people are making assumptions that we're not doing anything, or, there's a lot of fear around the idea of using algorithms, or algorithms looking at your face and things like that. So we've really made a push in the last year or two to be more vocal, be a part of that conversation, and talk about, how we can keep improving in the future. We actually have a board of scientists and legal experts that we've assembled to just talk about these issues. We're pretty involved in the academic research that is going on around fairness, because we really want to be kind of a pioneer in that space.
Yeah, no, it is odd though. All these things you're talking about, they're so fascinating because, like, one of my thoughts was, so somehow, like, it shouldn't matter if the algorithm is necessarily so first of all, what do I want to say? An algorithm could actually be in identifying gender of the video of the participants in the video interviews, but if the algorithm's not using that information, then it's not really impacting things from a fairness perspective, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, it could be there with no weight.
Right. Exactly.
And that's essentially, it's essentially what we're doing by removing things.
Okay.
Just saying, either they have no weight or it just, the algorithm's blind to those things.
Right.
So yeah, I think human bias is obviously a big concern, and that's always been a concern in hiring. And it's, it's still part of the humans are still very much part of the process. So we've had a lot of customers that have given us numbers, like we've increased our diversity, or, there's like anecdotal stories, like a nurse that applied to work at this hospital. She's an African-American woman, applied several times. And then when they started using HireVue, she got through those initial stages. So I think, there's a lot of bias with resumes.
Yep.
There's a lot of bias with in-person interviews. If we can kind of take one slice of the whole funnel and at least help people get through that in kind of this more blind process, it does help more diversity get further into the funnel. But there's still the issue of, human bias in the further down the funnel as well. Yeah.
No, and though, of course, now you've got me thinking even counterintuitively, I guess. There is an element when, and maybe this is where the source of the bias comes from, maybe, like this idea somehow of, okay, this person could actually be technically good at doing this job, but they're not maybe this sounds so foolish. They're not fun to be around, or like they're not that likable. Though at the same time,
Sure.
I guess because of, with Tinder and whatnot, dating apps, there are algorithms can help with that. Like the idea that you could pick someone and even have them come in and be like, oh my gosh, plus they're the nicest person. I really get along with them. And it was all just based on these kind of algorithmic weights.
Yeah, so that kind of gets into an interesting question of like culture in a company, and it's something that's obviously important, but it's also something that can be used to be biased. Just let the bias run wild. Like, I don't like that person because they're not like me,
right?
Or something like that. So, we think about a lot of the same issues that exist with humans. And, if your current population is too homogeneous, are you getting that diversity? Are you getting people who, you want diversity, but you also want people who fit.
Right.
So we think a lot about questions like that with like team composition, and maybe someday we'll do something with that. But kind of saying this team has, this much analytical ability. They need a little more communication, or they need people who are more outgoing to help communicate what the team is doing. And those are definitely harder things to quantify. And we know video interviews do pick up on a lot of those, kind of like some of the nonverbal cues that tell things like that. But yeah, it's still up to the human to make those final decisions, and kind of, likability is a little bit of a hard thing to quantify.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. So there's two sides to this. I think the idea, it seems like it's just a matter of time before you could use something like this to actually create more optimal teams, in terms of having a full range of skills that you need on the team, some being more extroverted, some more analytical or whatever. But it was funny because it's the way you've talked about humans a couple times. It's almost like that's I'm not going to say that you're biased against humans. that'd be a weird thing for a human to tell another human. But it's funny, like that's still kind of the sticking point in a little bit with this stuff is the humans. And yet it's
harder to go ahead.
No. That's all. I mean, it's all for humans.
Yeah, and it's just, I guess, my sentiment comes from the fact that it's impossible to just peer inside of someone's brain and see why they made the decision they made.
Yeah.
So we know that humans are biased. We know we all have like implicit bias. You can go to, there's a website through Harvard, the implicit bias test.
Yep.
Take it. Everybody has it. So how does that manifest? It's like impossible to say. If a human picks someone because they had a gut feeling, they liked them because they were similar, they, age, race, gender, attractiveness, right, all those things, they can justify their decision by saying, oh, no, they were just really better. Whereas with an algorithm, we can actually go in and say, why did it pick this person? What are the things that it's looking for? Are those things biased? Are they things that make sense? Like, did you talk about previous experience? Did you talk about working in banking or whatever it happens right. to be that was important for that job? But but kind of a little bit of a switch of gears that I wanted to tell you about is we predict job performance, and a lot of times, we get a lot of questions like, well, is this some black box algorithm? Why does it say this person's going to be good? And why does it say this person's going to be bad? Yeah. And that's difficult. As a data scientist, the answer to that question is not usually something that would satisfy a non-data scientist, like, here's all the features, there's thousands of them, and these are the ones that were important. And they, it's kind of sometimes can be hard to form a story around why people get the scores that they get. So we last year just released a product, and this is kind of also geared towards people that don't have their own training data, but they do want some help, like going through their candidates. And we trained human evaluators. Like, we have a team of industrial organizational psychologists who trained human evaluators to watch videos of like the same questions that tie to certain competencies, like teamwork or, problem solving or things like this, and kind of had a strict rubric of what a good answer looks like and kind of a medium or poor answer. So we have a lot of human labeled data where we can train algorithms. If we ask those questions, we can train algorithms to give people scores on like competencies as well. So you can kind of get more of that explainability and a little more deep understanding when humans want to go through and look at those things and kind of understand why someone got the score they did, or why, or kind of what is their makeup. Like when it comes to kind of forming a team of people with diverse skills, you want to be able to look at what their skills are and kind of get deeper. So that's something we are also doing. Nice.
Well, on that note, we're going to end because that's all the time we have here, even though you've touched on so many different things that are really fascinating, and we could end up talking quite a while about them. But we're out of time for today, so I just want to thank you very much, Lindsey, for taking the time to be with us on the Intelligent Business Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, we'll be talking with Kate Strachnia, author and LinkedIn top voice in data science and analytics. We'll be talking specifically about data visualization. You should check it out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.